Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes for people to trickle in to the webinar, but thank you all for being here for our second Cox Family Speaker Series event. And we have Kevin Lee with us, and I will start very shortly. But I feel like with Zoom webinars or virtual meetings, there's always this, kind of 2 or 3 minutes of people kind of logging in to their computers. So we'll just give it a little bit of a lag. I also, and this really says more about me than anything else, find that the period before you begin an event or a Zoom meeting is this weird, like, should we make conversation? Do we have this kind of strange silence in which you're looking at the people on the screen? And so, Kevin, I will just, if you don't mind, ask you a question that is, innocuous and kind of chit-chatty in the way that if we were in person, I might ask you, which is, I know that it is 8 o'clock at night where you are. Is Switzerland like Spain, where you're not expected to have dinner until 10 o'clock, or did you eat dinner?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah, they closed the restaurants pretty early here. So yeah, I had dinner. I had a burrito actually, because this talk made me, give all these nostalgic vibes for being in the United States. So it was the closest I could find.
What is a burrito in Switzerland like?
I'm almost ashamed. Well, it was edible, and with enough kind of nostalgic projection, it was quite enjoyable, to be honest. So, but nowhere near what you probably get in Boulder or Denver or anywhere in the Western United States.
I do have to say, as somebody who grew up in California and, is really glad to find myself back on more of the Western side of the US. No shade to North Carolina. There's wonderful cuisine in North Carolina, but I have found the burritos to be really good here. And there is green chili, which really became a revelation for me, which I think is very much kind of a New Mexico, Utah, Colorado phenomenon. And I've become a real fan of the green chili. So yeah,
I had a green condiment with my burrito, but I don't know if it's anywhere close to what you had. But it was spicy, and it was fine.
Excellent. Well, let's pivot from nostalgia for Kevin of U.S. cuisine. Although I feel like we could have a whole conversation, and maybe we'll save this for the Q&A, because one of the things I'm curious about is whether you've experienced Chinese food being in Europe, because I have to say that the Chinese food I've had in my various European travels has not lived up to the Chinese food that I've had growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I feel like we could have a whole conversation on European.
We certainly could.
Cuisine. Okay. So for those of you who are joining us, welcome to the Cox Family Speaker Series event. This is hosted by the Center for Humanities and the Arts. My name is Jennifer Ho. I'm director of the CHA. I also really want to give a huge thank you to Kat Lewis, our events and communication manager, who actually is leaving us. This is Kat's last day. And so, that makes me very sad, but I'm very happy for Kat in all that she's going to be going on to do in her new role in Adams County. And we do have Danny Urbina to also thank, who's been our undergraduate worker, who's been doing all of the social media campaigns and created the flyer for today's event. So if you're not familiar with the Cox Family Speaker Series, and this is actually only speaker number 2 in the series, the idea is to invite a scholar or artist or both of renown, somebody who has made their mark in their particular discipline and field, and to invite them to talk about a work that they're known for. And then to really talk about what the genesis of that work was, because I think so often for our renowned scholars and artists, it's not as if they created their work thinking, aha, I am going to create a work of renown in which I'll get invited to talk about it, right? So we're going to ask them about we're going to ask our invited speaker to talk about the genesis of Transformers Premake, the reception of that work, and it is a piece that has received numerous accolades and very positive reviews. And people have said that that's a work that has really changed the field, right? And then also what Kevin Lee has done after that, like what other work has emerged from Transformers Premake. We also have a discussant, Sarah Biaganini. I'm probably mispronouncing your name, Sarah, so I apologize, who's going to respond and be a discussant for Kevin's work, and then we will lead off into Q&A. So feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We've opened the chat. We really invite people to share your responses, other things that that occur to you, so that we can have this be more conversational. And then we will have a hard stop at 2 o'clock, because I know we all lead very busy lives. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to do my introduction of Kevin, and then Kevin, you get to take it away. So Kevin B. Lee directs cross-media publishing at MERS. And again, I am going to mispronounce things, and I apologize to all my German-speaking friends. At MERS Academy Stuttgart, he is a filmmaker, film critic, and producer of over 350 video essays. Let's all let that sink in. 350 video essays that explore connections between film and media. He is also the founding editor and chief video essayist at Fandor Keyframe and founding partner of Degenerate Films, a distribution company for independent Chinese cinema. He often collaborates with filmmaker and media artist Chloe Galibert-Lenné, thank you. Their work has been shown at IFFR, True False Film Festival, Open City Documentary Film Festival, Camden International Film Festival, and London Essay Film Festival, as well as art venues such as the Ars Electronica Festival and the WRO Media by Art Biennial. Most recently, he's been appointed to Locarno Film Festival Professor for the Future of Cinema and Audiovisual Arts at USI, Università della...
Università Svizzera Italiana.
Okay,
showing off my Italian skills.
No, thank you very much, because clearly these are not languages that I speak. I will share on a more personal note that in corresponding with Kevin, I've learned that, like me, he is the child of immigrant parents from China, raised in the Bay Area of California. And though his parents didn't encourage his filmmaking career, as you can see, again, let's throw out the number 350, Kevin's been very successful in the genre of making films about films, especially in the desktop documentary format. As a fellow Asian American from the Bay Area who also thinks a lot about my subject position as a Chinese American with connections to China and the US, I really appreciate Kevin's works. So without further ado, Kevin B. Lee.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you everyone for joining me today. I know, we've been through 2 years of Zoom events during the pandemic, and now that we're kind of moving out of the pandemic, it means a lot that you would want to spend 90 minutes looking at me through your screen. So I want to make this as live and as meaningful as possible. I think, when I think about cinema, my relation to cinema in this day and age, a lot of it has to do with what we've experienced in the last 2 years, having consumed so much media through our screens. And what does it mean to experience not just cinema, but life through this particular interface? And so, I think this becomes a very fascinating and relevant kind of starting point to think about, how can we use the dimensions of the screen, not just as a means to an end, but as an end to itself, as something that we can actually like direct our attention to, rather than using it just to get through this thing called life, as Prince said. And connecting to what Jennifer had just acknowledged about my background as immigrants, one story that I like to tell, because I've been asked this question. I think filmmakers get asked this question at some point by young aspiring filmmakers, students. My students have asked me, "Hey, Kevin, what was the movie that made you fall in love with movies?" And I find this to be a very romantic question, right? It's like a meet cute, a rom-com. But when I think about what genre of relationship I've had with film in my life, it's not a rom-com. It's more of a family drama. because my parents were working class immigrants, and they worked all day and all night, and they would leave me at home. And so what I would do is just watch movies and television all day and night. So it wasn't a rom-com. It was basically like my substitute parent. It wasn't one movie. It was many movies and TV shows consumed, over my entire childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. So that, I think that just goes to show, not just during the pandemic, but years and decades of screen-based existence, screen-based relating, screen-based understanding of life. And so I think that's one kind of personal subtext that, to be honest, I haven't really gotten into so much when I've talked about Transform as a Premake, and Jennifer's introduction really shed a light on that. So I really appreciate that. Also that my parents did actively discourage me from pursuing a career in film. So they just didn't think it was very practical. I'm actually quite envious of minorities, people of color, Asians, Chinese, Japanese, American kids growing up today, because I feel like they are in a much more supportive cultural environment to encourage and enable their dreams and pursuits of filmmaking. So in some ways, I feel like the tortured, angsty, situation that I had back in the 80s and 90s feels a bit obsolete, and for the better. But I will say that has informed my kind of dualistic relationship to filmmaking, in that I've never given myself somehow full permission. Like, filmmaking always felt a bit forbidden or inaccessible to me. Like, I internalized that message from my parents, and yet at the same time I still wanted to find ways to persist and find a way of making films without having the permission or the wherewithal to make films, what we might call cinema by other means. And so I think this also informs why instead of making movies as we commonly recognize them, I've made what's known as video essays, which are short videos that study film. So in many ways, on the one hand, it's like being able to make films by using films that already exist and using them to bring out new insights, to kind of realize my own voice, which is on the one hand the voice of a spectator, but a critical spectator. So it's also reenacting that entire childhood of sitting in front of screens and just taking in other people's work, and somehow finding a way to realize my own creative authorial position in that spectatorship, that consumption could somehow become a means of authorship and production. And so then that raises this question of what is the relationship between production and consumption. I think I don't know how it's taught in film classes at Boulder, but like traditionally the way it's taught is like, okay, first you have the author, the writer, director, producer, and the industry apparatus enabling them to produce a work that then goes through the distribution system, and then you have thousands of consumers, of audiences, members who are there to receive the work. So it's a very linear, unidirectional process that describes film production and spectatorship as we've known it. But I hope it's fairly evident now in this day and age that that linearity has been thoroughly disrupted, that we now, with the tools at our disposal, whether it's the phones that we hold in our hands or the desktops we use to edit our own movies, or to take, or like what I've done, take movies that exist and make them into our own creations, that this production consumption chain is really multi-directional, and it creates new possibilities, new creative possibilities, new economies, new exchanges, new systems of circulation, distribution, and connection between producers and consumers, that producers are consumers and vice versa. So I think, you know, if you've seen Transformers: The Premake, I think that's a lot of that is fairly evident in the video. I can also give you a little bit of background personally of where I was when I made it. I was in Chicago, where I was doing graduate school in 2013, and I had come to graduate school basically like broke and desperate, because I'd been making video essays for several years, and this in itself was like my only claim to sustainability with regards to what at that time was my profession as a professional film critic. So I'd been practicing film criticism for several years, close to a decade. And it wasn't until I had started using my background in video editing and production to make video essays that I could then differentiate myself as someone who wasn't just writing reviews like everybody else, but he was actually, you know, he could do the film critic function in audiovisual form, and this was new. And so because of this, I could actually get paid 5 times more than what a writer would get paid, which, you know, sounds great, right? But the thing is, you get paid 5 times more, but you work 10 times more. Like the amount of hours it took to watch films, to script a video essay, then to edit the video essay. I was spending upwards of, you know, 13 to 15 hours a day in front of my screen, watching films, writing, editing, publishing, and promoting, because that's the thing these days. You no longer benefit from an existing publishing platform to promote your work. If anything, you're the one doing the promoting for yourself and for them. So it really it was a nice run. I made 350 video essays, and the reason why I had to do that was because it was the only way I could sustain myself. Because, you know, I had to make a video every week for several years in order to just be able to pay the bills. And eventually I just couldn't keep that up. So I actually went to graduate school because there were film professors telling me that they were using my video essays to teach concepts of film in their classes, and it was so much more effective than lecturing. And I was listening to this and I was like, how can I get into that action? You know, I want to be able to show my own videos and get paid for it, paid more than I actually get made for making them. So then that got the idea of like, okay, I should go to graduate school and get a master's degree so I can teach. So I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for my MFA, and I had to think of a project. It was at that time that Transformers, the 4th edition of Transformers Age of Extinction, was being filmed in Chicago. So I thought, wow, I could probably make use of this opportunity to study a Hollywood film production in situ, and in some ways escape my sad fate as a film critic, and not just because I was, you know, an underpaid, frustrated film critic, but also to escape a certain irrelevance of film critics, that they, you know, a film like Transformers is basically critic proof because it's so big and so hyped that whatever a critic will say won't matter. So I thought that if I could somehow observe the production, I can come up with a fresh insight, one that's based on, you know, ground level field observation of how Hollywood works in a place like Chicago. And also finally get away from my screen because I was so burned out and I just wanted to like spend some time in the sun and the outdoors. And so okay, I could make something about movies, but do it outdoors in the fresh air and like, you know, get in touch with physical spaces in my own body. So I was really looking forward to that. The problem was that when I encountered the production, they had sequestered the entire downtown area of Chicago and blocked it off so that you only had very limited views of what was going on. Some people have asked me, did you reach out to the production to have access? And maybe, this was my parents' kind of like forbidding voice going in my head. Like, I didn't ask them for permission because maybe because there was part of me that was like, I didn't think I would get it. Again, it was my parents' voice in my head. Or maybe because I didn't want it. Like, this tortured relationship I've had with Hollywood and film productions, I guess manifested itself in the sense that I didn't want to kind of, indenture myself or ingratiate myself to the industry. I wanted to preserve a certain outsiderness, a certain autonomy to look at this production critically and independently, and in so doing, to occupy the position of a regular citizen in Chicago, because ordinary citizens in Chicago were not being allowed to walk through the streets of their city because of this production. At the same time, they didn't seem to mind so much because it was like Hollywood coming to town. It was like Disneyland. It was like, it's a big show. So I was trying to find ways to get, views and insights into the production. But again, I couldn't get very far. And ironically, it was only by occupying private spaces that I could see what was happening in public spaces. What do I mean by this? Okay, now I think I can share my screen. And so here's a scene from Transformers, the Premake. I know Zoom sometimes when the thing is like, the panel is like in front of the screen. I hope you see it well, and there are these like annoying gray splotches blocking your view. Let me know if there are. So this is the inside of a Starbucks, which is facing LaSalle, one of the main streets in downtown Chicago where they were doing the filming. And so this is what I mean. I wasn't allowed to stand outside on the street, but only by like going inside a private establishment could I then get a view. And so I just want to show this, just a sample for those who haven't seen Transformers: The Premake.
Just for a you change the sunshine to rain. Just for a thrill.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause on this particular image because this was a moment of revelation for me. Like me, the aspiring filmmaker who went to, a famous art school to get professionalized as a filmmaker or as a video artist, spending tens of thousands of dollars in tuition, I'm ashamed to say, with aspirations to become an auteur, like literally in the same physical position as hundreds of other people with their phones pointing at the same thing I was pointing at. It was really humbling, to be honest. I looked at this and I thought, like, what am I doing? Like, how is what I'm doing any different than what this crowd is doing? Like, what is my position as a filmmaker in all of this? So, I had actually spent like 5 weeks following this production through different areas of Chicago, and I had gotten like dozens of hours of footage but it didn't really add up to a coherent picture of what this production was about. And then, shortly after the production ended, I'm like sifting through my footage, and then I check YouTube, and I noticed that some of the people that you're seeing on this image were uploading their own footage onto YouTube. And it was really fascinating because they were getting things that I didn't get. In some ways, they were better camera people than I was. And so again, I was humbled. So and then I started to ask myself, okay, what am I doing? Like, really, what is this? But at the same time, I started to get curious about just how much of this footage was out there. It just seemed like there was more and more footage being uploaded. So then I just took a long weekend doing variations of YouTube searches, keyword searches, Transformers production, Transformers behind the scenes, Transformers making of set footage. So I can actually show you the results of that research. So if you see this Google Doc, it's basically a spreadsheet of every YouTube video related to the production of Transformers: The Premake that I could find. I found about 355 YouTube videos. And so then with this immense collection, I just started watching them and then it just gave me such a bigger view of the production, because it wasn't just Chicago. I found videos in Texas, in Michigan, specifically Detroit, where they spent a significant amount of time, and there are a lot of YouTube videos of Detroit. And then, of course, Chicago and different areas in Chicago. And even it went on to Hong Kong and China. So then I was able to get a global scale of this production and see who was, filming it and putting them on YouTube. I could see the dates of when the videos were uploaded. And by doing that, I could then map this production and geolocate it within specific dates to follow the trail of how this production moved through the world from August to November 2013. And then being a film critic, of course, I even had a little column where I gave each video a rating, which seems like such a film critic thing to do, but it actually proved really helpful because it allowed me to find my focus. When you have 355 YouTube videos to look at, it's important to kind of know where to start or which of these videos really strike you as having something particularly strong to offer. So, with little notes as well. And so by doing that, I could really start to, find my particular areas of interests and start to put these things together. So I started to, look at this video, look at these videos, look at my videos, see how they could be put together. I started to think, how could I make a documentary, kind of like a, sort of in the video essay realm, where I'm using other people's footage, except this time it's not Hollywood footage, it's like amateur footage, which is pretty interesting. And make a documentary that can critically analyze the production of Hollywood through this amateur footage. And then thinking some more about that, I thought, you know what? This was January 2014. It wouldn't be that I was like making a remake of the film, because you could see video essays as a kind of critical remaking of films, but instead I'm pre-making the film, and I'm circumventing, I'm leapfrogging over the entire production, distribution, consumption chain, and really, inserting myself as a critic in a earlier part of that chain to produce a more interesting insight about what this production is. So then I got really excited about this idea of a pre-make. So with that, I started editing footage, but it was, again, really frustrating to try to tell this story in a normal way with, like, I had these versions that had a voiceover, that had, sequences, like kind of putting things together so that you were like there. And it just wasn't really coming together. I don't know if it was just that I'm either unable or unwilling to make documentaries in that way. But anyway, I got really frustrated and down. I think it was, I had started working on this in August 2013. I was looking at March 2014. I've been sort of toiling on this project for 8 months, and I still didn't know what it was supposed to be like. And there was one day that I was with my advisor, Frederick Muffet, where he, I just kind of opened these folders. I showed him all the folders of my stuff. I have all these footage, all these hours of footage, and I don't know what to do. And I just like double clicked on all the files, and it did this. And he saw that and he thought, this is pretty cool. You should put that in your film. I've never seen that in a film before. I'm like, okay, yeah, but how do I put this in my film? I would have to record my screen, and is that even a thing? Can you do that? So that's when I discovered that there is this thing called screen recording, and that thinking about this particular effect as a kind of creative expression, a creative possibility of what the desktop could do aesthetically and even dramatically. I started thinking more about this, and I realized that, ever since I had that moment of frustration seeing all the YouTube videos made by others, I had spent a lot of time online doing research. I had been doing things like mapping out the production on a Google map. I had done things like take this, do these like searches about fan labor as a way of understanding what I was seeing on the street. I had done things like take this, do you guys remember Prezi? I don't know if anyone's still using Prezi, but it was a big thing back in 2014. And I thought this was my way to kind of do something innovative, was to put the videos in a Prezi. And by doing that, I could map out the production through space and time across the entire world. So, all the way from the USA to Hong Kong and China. And then by doing that, I had gotten interested in the Chinese aspect of the film. And so I started doing research into what the film was doing in China, why it was in China, the Chinese box office, which was getting bigger and bigger. It was the #2 box office in the world. And now, thanks to COVID, it is the #1 box office in the world. And how a film like Transformers was actively forming itself, devising itself to appeal to a Chinese box office. And then how did that make sense with where it was being filmed in the United States, in Chicago, in Detroit? And so then looking carefully at the Detroit footage, I could see that Detroit, this impoverished, broken down city, was being used as a stand-in for China as a way to attract the film industry to Detroit, but also as a way for the film industry to exploit Detroit through these immense tax incentives that they were getting these tax breaks to film in Detroit. So really just for me, opened my eyes to the economics of film production on both a local and a global scale. And then to think about all of this, being available online, so that on the one hand, you've got this global film economy happening in cities around the world, but at the same time, you have this ad hoc YouTube economy of YouTubers who are like in on the production and then putting the videos on their websites and claiming it as their own creations. So, again, it brought me back to my childhood dream of making movies. And, am I allowed to make movies? Am I not allowed to make movies? How can I have a role in this industry that I dream of being part of? And to see how that same impulse, those same questions are manifested in this way by other people between the film industry and social media and YouTube. So having realized that so much of what I had discovered was done through internet research and through watching things on my screen, I realized, okay, this is how I tell the story. So then at that point, I just fully embraced screen recording as my mise en scène, as my means of exploring and learning and really just being able to allow my audience to accompany me on my journey the way that I found these things out, so that it really is kind of experiential and intimate. I mean, I remember the first time people saw this, they felt like their computer had been hijacked, like they'd been hacked, and this whole internet search that was happening on their computer screens, and that kind of collapsing of distances between my screen and their screen, and the kind of intimacy that produces, I find very special. Different from other types of cinematic intimacy, certainly different from the intimacy that you would, experience in a movie theater. So, it really just created a lot of fantastic new questions and possibilities for me. So then I was able to finish releasing it. I did finish it in time. I released it 2 weeks before the real movie came out, and this is kind of where my film critic background kicked in, because I had many film critic friends. So I told them that this was coming. I shared them with them, and so when it came out, immediately there were several reviews written about it by film critics that I knew, and it also got picked up by the New York Times. And so by doing that, by getting that kind of initial exposure, I think that actually helped the video from getting taken down, because I mean, it could very well have been taken down. Like Paramount could have made a claim for like copyright violation, even though it's a bit ambiguous. Like what sort of copyright violation are we talking about? Is like you using a location in Chicago as your set a form of copyright, that you've copyrighted a public space because you're filming a movie on it. And so if I'm filming that public space, I'm in violation of your copyright. So anyway, because I was able to get enough publicity, the video was allowed to stay online. And so it got a fair amount of attention. There were some who felt like it was a trailer. Actually, I think it was Forbes magazine that described it as an innovative form of film production, like a new kind of behind the scenes video. And I was like, wow, okay, either I didn't do a good enough job being critical, or they're just too much of a industry oriented publication to see that. But I did get plenty of other reviews that could see the critical dimension of the film. I never got a reply from anyone at Paramount, although I did get a nice email from Shia LaBeouf saying it was the best video essay he'd ever seen for what that was worth. Then another interesting thing that happened with regards to distribution is that I had wanted to show my work in film festivals. I'd never shown my work in film festivals before. And, I felt like this had a legitimate shot at being shown in film festivals, but I also kind of knew that if I put it on YouTube, it would diminish, if not completely ruin, the chances of it being selected for film festivals, since they prefer to have things that are exclusive and to have things that are, that are not available online. But, I chose to put it on YouTube because it was a matter of principle. It was a matter of, I had made this film using YouTube, and it's about the YouTube visual economy. So I felt it was important to put my work kind of back at the source of where I found my materials. So I did that. I did also submit it to festivals like New York Film Festival or Rotterdam, and they wrote some very polite, answers like, well, we love your film, but it's on YouTube, so it doesn't really need us anymore. Thanks anyway. Then I got a request from the head programmer of the Vienna Film Festival, the Biennale, which is known for having very iconoclastic programming tastes and holding a high standard for cinema. And the programmer wrote that he had heard about my film and would love to consider it for the festival if I could send him a screener copy. And so I gave him a link to YouTube, because that's where it was. And he replied, thanks for the link, but I have to explain to you that I don't watch anything online, because I believe in the cinema and that things should be watched in a cinema. And I even have a cinema in my own house where I watch every film that's being considered for the Biennale. So if you want your film to be considered for the Biennale, you have to send me a Blu-ray or a DVD screener. So I took my YouTube video, I put it on a Blu-ray, and I sent it to Vienna. And then a week later, I got a reply from him saying, I love this film. I would love to give it a European premiere. So it was that was the festival where it was shown. And then the same film festivals that had rejected it before saw it playing at Vienna, and then they accepted it. They invited it to their festivals, which I found so fascinating, that the rules that were governing what gets shown where and for what reasons are not set in stone. And they, it's a lot of it is just kind of like who positions something in such a way that suddenly it makes sense or it's acceptable to do so. So this was another kind of revelation for me, that the film really allowed me to understand the operations of distribution and assigning of value, not just through the production of the film and the people who are, catching it with their cameras, their phones, and putting it on YouTube, and then also seeing how that was playing out between YouTube and film festivals. So and so in many ways, this film encapsulates a lot of what I guess what I stand for, consciously or not. I mean, it really is about not feeling totally at place in any particular context. Again, the way Jennifer set up the talk, I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm Asian American, therefore I made this film, but I do appreciate, this is the first time that I've ever talked about this work within that context of having this kind of marginal dimension to my identity and my social self-image, and seeing that playing out with why experimental film speaks to me, why this type of filmmaking speaks to me, in that in some ways it's whether it's embracing or accepting this marginal dimension to my identity and finding an aesthetic and a means of filmmaking that expresses that marginality. That's where I'm at. So beyond that, I mean, Jennifer, you asked me, talk about work I've done since. Yeah, I've been experimenting with desktop films, but again, it's like, I could have totally milked this and made it my my claim to fame, and maybe in some cases it still is. And I've seen other filmmakers really claim this desktop-based method as their signature. If you may know of Timur Bekmambetov, he's a Russian filmmaker who produces horror movies that take place on screens, and he has this whole production outfit called Screen Life, where he does things with desktops and smartphones, and yeah, so it's very much a thing. And especially in the last 2 years with COVID, it really took off, because it went from being this kind of novelty, this kind of curiosity, playing with the desktop interface as a mode of cinematic storytelling, into something like a practical necessity. Oh yeah, Jennifer, I see you in the chat, the John Cho film Searching, and that was produced by Timur Bekmambetov. So that just goes to show. Yeah, and by the way, if anyone has questions or chat that they want to put in at any time, I know Sarah, I think, is going to offer a response very soon. Thank you in advance, Sarah. Yeah, but during lockdown, students, filmmakers didn't have access to sets, cameras, crew, and I started getting all of these requests to give workshops and guest lectures about desktop filmmaking. And so it really went from being this exotic anomaly into almost like a practical necessity for how you can continue making audiovisual work and telling cinematic stories under these conditions. And not only that, but also as a reflection of the reality that we endured for the last 2 years, right? I mean, I don't know if people would want to watch a desktop film today, because I think a lot of us are over it and we want to get as far away from our screens as possible. And I'm actually one of them. I the last short film I made, 2020, was called Once Upon a Screen: Explosive Paradox. I'm out in the open filming the site of a former movie theater, exploring a memory of childhood trauma with my family, where we went to see a movie together. And so there are almost no screens. There's no screens involved in that. But I actually use the back of the theater to film shadows and light playing on the back of this old movie theater that I can't get into anymore, as a way of recreating that cinematic experience. So so there are ways of playing with the idea of the screen that don't even involve a screen. So that's, I think that's kind of where I'm at now. I teach in I teach at the Università Svizzera Italiana as professor of the future of cinema, and I look at these types of questions of how social media, new forms of media making are transforming our notion of cinema, both as a cultural practice, as an art form, as an industry. And so it's funny that like I'm doing this in Switzerland of all places, so my marginal status continues. You know, but in any case, it's I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in cinema, the question of cinema, because it really is facing and confronting a lot of existential questions about what it is exactly in this day and age. But I think when we face those kinds of existential questions is when we feel most alive. And I think it's important to feel alive, especially when you're staring at a screen like you are now. So hopefully I offered something that was, you know, enlivening and helpful and illuminating. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer and Sarah.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I wish, I mean, I'm grateful for screens and devices and Zoom so that you can come to us. You know, especially because the BA2 variant is on the rise here in Colorado. I'm not sure what it's doing in Switzerland. But, you know, it would have been lovely to have you actually here in person and to, you know, and to show the film. Let me do a brief introduction of Sarah. And Sarah, go ahead and correct me when you come on. Biagini. Sarah is the lead programmer for Mimesis Documentary Festival in Boulder. She also teaches production in cinema studies and moving image arts at CU and is a founding member of Process Reversal, a Colorado-based nonprofit dedicated to film arts programming, preservation, and education. She has been filmmaker in residence at Alchemy Film and Moving Image Residences in Ettrick, Scotland, and visiting artist at Hellenic International Studies in the Arts in Paros, Greece. Her work has been screened most recently at International Short Film Festival, Oberhausen Union Docks, and the Denver Art Museum. And so, Sarah, we're looking forward to your response.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Kevin, for revealing so much about the making of your work. I had planned to just talk a little bit about, I show Transformers, the Premake in my classes sometimes. So I was just gonna share a little bit about the context in which I present it usually, but I think, I mean, you said a lot of things that kind of made me want to veer off course away from that, like talking about sort of the friction between like the private and the public, I think is really interesting. So maybe I'll get back to that. But I guess in the context of like my teaching, like I think a lot about this text that I use sometimes in class about cognitive theory and documentary editing. It's by Karen Perlman, who's a fairly prolific editor of maybe more like conventional, formally conventional documentaries. But so she focuses on this theory of the extended mind when she writes about documentary editing. So sort of thinking about how like that act of shaping raw material into a coherent documentary doesn't solely take place in the brain, but it's like an exercise of like collaboration almost between the editor and the shots themselves. And she has a nice, I think, pretty helpful analogy of like how we think through Scrabble tiles by like physically rearranging the letters that we get to help us come up with ideas for words or to help with word recall. And we do something really similar when we edit documentary, but it's even more cognitively complex, but in the same way that we think through those Scrabble tiles, like we think through the shots and like the thoughts themselves that we have don't occur in our minds, but they occur like through the process of making the edits. So I really like to present your work in that context of like making all that completely sort of visible, like talking about kind of the creative action of editing as involving making discoveries, being responsive, and then finding connections. And I really love, like, I think it's really valuable to see in your work all of those things happening like right in front of our very eyes, especially I think for people who sort of editing, I think as like, maybe we accept it generally speaking as like a really powerful part of constructing meaning in film or in documentary, but it's sort of like this mystified kind of part of the overall process, and we think of it as like being very intuitive, but really seeing it kind of like seeing all of your discoveries and your sorting and like kind of revealing the way you're perceiving these shots and making connections between them, I think is like really valuable for students. And I mean, interesting for everyone, but so that's like that's kind of the context that I really like to use your work in class or in teaching anyway. So I don't know if you want to respond to that at all.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to, because I know, Boulder is world famous for its experimental film filmmakers and film program, and it's been strangely provocative to think about whether this work qualifies as experimental film, because the technique is different, but the process as you just laid out, and I've experienced this too, where like students find this a very relatable film, whereas watching other experimental films really puts them in the deep end and they're like trying to make sense. And that's actually what experimental film is supposed to do. It's supposed to challenge your preconceptions and your ease of access to sense making, and question those processes, whereas what I'm doing is fairly transparent in many ways, or it kind of like aims for a certain kind of transparency, like revealing the curtain, going behind the curtain and revealing the operations of Hollywood. And it's supposed to look very super legible. So in that sense, it doesn't do what many great experimental films do. So it's interesting to weigh those two modes or those two objectives side by side, and to ask, can they coexist? Can they actually work in the same film? Because they're, I've seen really great films that are about environmental issues, that have an activist stance and really wanting to engage with the viewer, but at the same time have wanting to uphold those ideals of experimental aesthetics, of challenging a viewer's assumptions of how they understand something, and not being like just catered to by talking heads or a authoritative voiceover, right? So how do these two things work together? Activism and transparency and a certain clarity of understanding. And so and I don't have an answer to that.
Can I actually ask a question for both of you, Kevin and Sarah? So I'm not a filmmaker. I haven't studied film, but I am somebody who consumes, I like watching movies. I like, I subscribe to many streaming services, and I'm active on social media. And so I was struck, Kevin, by what you said in terms of, in the last part of your remarks related to, your formal academic title, right? Which is that you're the professor of, let me go back to your bio, professor for the future of cinema and audiovisual arts. I mean, that's a pretty...
It's the most pretentious job title you could imagine.
Well, it's certainly, it's very forward looking, right? And it seems very daunting to think that you're responsible for thinking of the future of cinema. So when terms like, I was also struck by the anecdote you shared with the person who said, I don't watch things on screen, like I don't watch things on my laptop you need to send me a screener that I can watch in my private home theater in order to consider, and I just thought, well, that's a little precious, right? That struck me as being like a little bit precious. And so is there a technical definition of and distinction among terms like movie, film, cinema? Because I think for a layperson like me, they're sort of interchangeable, right? But I also recognize that uploading a video to YouTube, we're not making a movie right now, right? This is being recorded, this webinar, it's going to be on the YouTube channel. We are not making a movie, although maybe Kevin, you would.
Are we?
I don't know.
I think between me and Sarah, we can whip something up with this footage. I mean, there are. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And that's a very astute question. And I think there's a lot of context confusion, if you want to, look at it that way. That's especially happened in the last 2 years when we're watching, movies, when we have no choice but to watch movies on a laptop, for certain periods, and where the experience of watching each other or interacting with each other takes on certain kind of like durational cinema qualities of I don't know, we are looking at screens, and what is stopping this from being considered a movie? And is it because it's live? Is it because it's interactive? But there have also been experiments with live cinema. There was this amazing work called My First Film, where the filmmaker did a live stream performative documentary analyzing why her first feature was a failure. And so she calls it a movie, but it's a live stream. So a lot of it is what associations we attach to these terms, but I think they're very much up in the air right now. It's very much open to debate.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I mean, that experience that you had where you had to send a Blu-ray or DVD. I mean, that's I feel like that's becoming more rare, but still, that would have been way more common just 5 or 10 years ago. At just the documentary festival that we host here from CU, we just this year our submissions are open right now, and we've gotten a fair amount of video essays as submissions, which I don't think I've never seen that before, and I was pretty surprised. But it is it's a documentary form. It's and I'm really interested in how documentary forms evolve and are going to continue evolving, but it doesn't quite feel to me, it doesn't quite feel like the appropriate place to show a video essay that is a more sort of traditional, someone is narrating their own thoughts or telling me sort of how to think about this scene or this shot or whatever. But it's also I mean, I'm as a programmer, I'm always trying to interrogate my own sort of gut reactions. But yeah, I think, and we also we try not to use the word film when we're talking about the work that gets submitted. But to your question, Jennifer, it is, it also feels old fashioned, or the evolution of the terminology is ongoing, and we're just always trying to I don't know if keep up is the right word, but to some extent, we try to avoid calling things films, regardless if it was shot on film. We use this more general, either the very more general and specific at the same time. We call things documentaries, or we just call everything a project. We really try to avoid even using that word as a noun these days, film, at our festival anyway. But
So movies and films, like if, you know, the fact that I do feel comfortable using the term movies and films would kind of mark me as somebody who's not a practitioner, right? Not somebody who's either academically or scholarly inclined to do this kind of analysis or making this product, because film suggests is part of a older medium of when people shot on 16mm film. Is that part of the rationale for not using that term, or because that it's within your profession, it's not a term that people use?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting hearing, yeah, Sarah, like, because we still call it film festivals. Maybe it's the alliteration that, you know, is catchy. But you know, Cannes is still a film festival, Berlin is still a film festival. These are like the big, you know, biggest film festivals in the world. But yeah, because it does reference a material, if you want to be super literal about it, that is no longer really in use. So yeah, and it could be a matter of time where that the term just sort of falls off altogether. I mean, you know, all bets are off. And you know, in terms of like, even it's also a matter of like associational value, that when we hear this word, does it spark joy in our heart? Does it light a fire or create an image like it would have in generations past? You know, if I were to propose a TikTok festival, would that get as much excitement as a film festival? And I'm not being facetious, because only recently did the Cannes Film Festival announce a partnership with TikTok, where they're going to invite TikTok, you know, select TikTokers who have like huge followings to like exclusive events and meetings, to like, so that they get the greatest TikToks at Cannes. And then they were actually having a TikTok short film award, a short film competition. So you'll submit your like 30-second to 3-minute TikTok short film to the Cannes Film Festival, and they have yet to announce who it is, but a famous director will be the judge of these submissions, and they will award a top prize to a lucky TikToker. And it's like, okay, so TikTok Film Festival. And what was really funny though was like, when TikTok announced the partnership, they said, we are pleased to welcome the Cannes Film Festival to our community. Like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I found that so sly in terms of what the power dynamics are in terms of cultural value, and that it's not probably what the Cannes Film Festival is assuming.
Well, I mean, is that the future of cinema? I mean, is the future of cinema social media, short, consumable things, right? Because, I mean, I imagine that from the commercial side of things, I mean, I don't know the last time I watched a 3-hour film back when I was, you know, going to a live theater, and I haven't been since the pandemic, but I mean, I can't remember the last over 3-hour film that I watched in a movie theater. So is this a fad, or is this the future? These kind of short streamable TikTok video?
Good question. I mean, I don't think it's going in any one particular direction or another, because for every TikTok craze, I'm seeing things on YouTube that are like 8 hours long, like, and live streamers. So there is also this other extreme of extended duration. I mean, in my class today, we were looking at examples of post cinema involving, you know, mood videos. Like, someone took all the landscape shots from the movie Dune and just sort of looped them and stretched them out. So you have like an 8-hour YouTube video that's just the landscape shots from Dune, played slow with like ambient music. And apparently it has like 1 million views, because people just want to be taken there. It's like a sort of like ad hoc VR experience. Like, I'm in the planet Dune and I can just like be there and not have to deal with narrative or whatever. And this actually benefits the economics of YouTube. YouTube actually encourages people to upload longer and longer videos, because they a few years ago they shifted from an economic model based on view counts, like, you know, because they saw that there was just a lot of clickbait, a lot of just garbage that was just getting like millions of views, but not really quality videos. So they changed the equation to reward films. I'm sorry, reward videos that keep people watching. So that's when even video essays. I actually saw a 6-hour video essay that someone made, and I'm like, wow, hats off to you. Like, you actually and this is actually being encouraged, because again, it feeds into the economy of attention. So it's very much the opposite of TikTok.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but
Sarah,
I guess, but getting back, I'm sorry, I was just because
go
I'm
ahead.
looking at Sarah and I'm just thinking, you know, and I work with a film festival, so I kind of share a lot of her concerns about what the role of a film festival is in the midst of all this. I don't have a definitive answer, but I would like to, but I assume it has something to do with providing a meaningful alternative to these like mainstream practices, enough that, you know, it does attract enough people who are seeking that alternative, and offering them another way to enjoy moving images and to make moving images.
I was just going to ask Sarah if you had any more questions for Kevin before I pivot to the ones that I put in the chat.
No, I mean, I guess what you were just saying brought me back to thinking about that, like the public versus private. Again, like how you were saying, you know, while you were trying to shoot in Chicago, like you had to go inside that Starbucks to shoot what was going on the street. And then I really liked that part actually where the man crosses the street with his dry cleaning, and like those little, like those feel like such powerful moments of impact where like someone feels like they're sort of their whatever their routine or whatever it is like being infringed upon, right? Like in that public space. And then like maybe the flip side of that is like thinking about, or you having to kind of make that decision of like keeping it on YouTube, keeping your project on YouTube, even though like the festivals aren't gonna like that, right? Like, because they want that exclusivity, and like they, you know, they're really trying to make a private space where not everyone gets to see that work. So like thinking about maybe, I don't know, to what you were saying, Jennifer, like less about the duration of TikTok, but maybe more about like the access of something on a streaming platform versus the access, both as a way to get material to make work, but then also as a way to like share work. You know, there's so much friction there that I think is really interesting, and that all comes out in your work, Kevin. So that was my final comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, Kevin, I think your work is so provocative on many levels, in really the best senses, right? I mean, to think critically about a lot of questions about production, about consumption, and maybe let's start with the first question, which is, and I'll just read it out loud. Some estimate 90% or more of U.S. mainstream media is owned by 6 to 10 corporations: Disney, Comcast, Paramount, Fox, AT&T, Sony, Apple, Netflix, Amazon, Google, etc. Do you see your practice, especially in Transformers, as a way of resisting or critiquing this situation or these corporations? Do you feel an imperative to provide an alternative media narrative, or are these disparate models mutually constitutive?
Right. I mean, it's a great question. And I think it was kind of, I think I was looking at that question while I was making this remark with Sarah about film festivals as the place that an alternative can be provided, because of like, yeah, when you could look at Transformers as a Premake from a certain angle and be like, well, you know, you're critiquing Hollywood, but the alternative is these YouTubers who are uploading to a platform owned by Google. And you yourself, Kevin, made this work using an iPhone and a MacBook. So, you know, it's like, there's no escaping the matrix, you know. It's like but on the other hand, I mean, but then you can counter argue that, well, you can, you know, maybe we can never escape these platforms, and but maybe it's not about that, but about how we can, at least at certain moments, be able to use the platforms to open up new spaces and new possibilities that are beyond the intentions and the agendas of these platforms. But you know, that is like kind of trying to like outrace capitalism. And I did at one point, I you know, when I thought about doing this Premake, I thought, wow, this is a way of outracing capitalism. I can like somehow, you know, leapfrog over the capitalist machinery, like moving through the planet. But I mean, that could very well be kind of a utopian illusion to itself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure any of us can really escape capitalism, no matter how hard we try. But you know, it's provocative to think that we might, or that, you know, Transformers, you know, Premake could have been some kind of response. Okay, so let's take the second question. So would the video essay work without voiceover text or discourse?
Yeah, I mean, it also makes me think again about, you know, the kind of video essays that Sarah is getting, and is it just like it's really arrived at a certain formula and convention that especially YouTube has crafted? Because as far as I'm concerned, yeah, Transformers: The Premake is a video essay, and it was actually an attempt to address a criticism that I got early on of like, well, your video essays can never be art if you're going to have voiceover in it, because then it's just like this explainer thing that, you know, and that's not cinema. True cinema doesn't need a voiceover to explain what's happening. So, you know, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think there are amazing filmmakers who've used voiceover to very poetic effect, like Terrence Malick or Chris Marker or Jean-Luc Godard. But I do have to say, Transformers: Premake, the one reason why I don't say anything, I don't do any narration, was, well, A, I did try that and it was terrible, and B, it was a way of addressing that question. So yeah, and the same goes for text. Discourse, I'm not sure what is meant by that, if it's like some kind of discussion or you know, or if it's more of like an associational. And it gets back to what I was, you know, discussing with Sarah about, yeah, I think, well, certainly experimental film can challenge those sort of foundational tools that we normally rely on to understand what's happening. And I think it's important to do that. And I do think that the video essay has some skin in that game too. Like, but those are the kinds that really skew more into the experimental realm. But I don't, so there might be some people who try to like divide video essay and experimental as two different genres, but there's actually nothing keeping them from intermingling with each other. And I think that's very exciting.
Cool, great. Okay, third question. What are the benefits and drawbacks of working in the desktop documentary format? Does it provide distance from subjects that is required for a more critical analysis? Or conversely, does that same distance ever prove problematic or frustrating?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is any different from, well, I mean, you can ask the same question of any type of filmmaking, like a camera. You know, does a camera, can you use a camera to film someone to create a distance from them or to create closeness and intimacy? I think the same thing can be, you know, asked of, yeah, desktop documentary. It's really a matter of technique and approach. And when I look at Transformers: The Premake, there's certainly a closeness with me as the narrator, so to speak. Like you're following what's going on my desktop, and that, I think that's a very distinct kind of closeness that the desktop form provides. But I think at the same time, because it's looking at things through a virtual interface, I think that there's an implied distance there. Like you're seeing things through the internet, or rather it raises the question of what is the distance between us and the things we see online. And, and I think the answers will vary. I mean, I think people, there's some instances where people get very attached and very, emotionally connected or charged by things that they see online, whether it's real or not, whether it's like in their neighborhood or on the other side of the world. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, benefits, drawbacks. I think maybe one if there's any drawback, it would be that if it doesn't have a distance to what's showing, if it isn't able to, if it just replicates what's on the internet and what's on the desktop without somehow stimulating a new way of looking at it. But that's also true for camera-based filmmaking as well,
The next question sort of pivots a little bit in a similar direction. That doesn't make any sense to say pivot.
Yeah, it's pretty similar.
But I think it gets at, so I'll just read the question. Using video in the service of critique makes the analysis or argument strangely compelling, almost seductive. Is this dangerous? It's almost as if the video essay needs another essay to critique it. I wasn't actually sure what the question was getting at. So I mean,
you can sort of say it as like, we always come into new forms, new genres as a way of, I guess, addressing the shortcomings of whatever form came before. Like, just today we were looking at films from the 2000s that had this shaky cam quality, if you remember what that was like. And that was born of a need to create immediacy and of kind of verite, like, oh, you're there because the camera is unstable, like it's too, it's supposed to be unpolished and to be against that kind of slick professionalism. But then that became its own cliche, and then you move to like, more composed shots in the 2010s and steady cam and glide cam. So, there's always a new form that in some way critiques the form before, but, it's critiqued then because it becomes its own attraction. And then that attraction somehow loses its critical edge and becomes another formula or another cliche. So, God, there were like, I think within a year of the transfers of Premake, people are already like, well, this isn't going to last very long because we're going to, who wants to watch desktops for, but now 7 years later, and like, it's still, it's as relevant as ever. But I'm still waiting for that day where people are just going to get over it and I can't look at desktops anymore. So.
I mean, I imagine there'll be we're all a little bit burnt out by our screens, but
yeah,
I also think that there are certain trends. I mean, I don't even say it's a trend. I think there are just certain technologies that we are now going to live with, like Zoom, right? I think Zoom is sort of for good or for ill. And I think it's maybe both, right? We're going to be having Zoom in our lives.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last question, how do you see the role of fieldwork documentary practice more generally? And how do you choose when to go into the field? So, for example, in the one that you were talking about, which I so appreciate, and honestly, people that haven't seen Explosive Paradox, you absolutely should. It's a very moving piece. Yeah.
And that was definitely made in the field, like in a location. But it's interesting to think of. There's a great professor at Cal Arts, Rebecca Barron, and she has a class called Doing Fieldwork in the Virtual Field, so that the internet is its own field, and I think that's what something like desktop documentary points in. It acknowledges, like, especially during COVID, like we spent so much of our daily experience was in a virtual space, and to not think of that as just something we had to get through, but actually it was our reality, and anything that is reality has value, and we have to find ways of, engaging that possibility of understanding what lived experience, what relationships, what our understanding of the world is within this virtual field, and to treat it as if it was, walking down the street or going to another location in the world, and reporting on and capturing what you encounter there. So I think this is, I don't think this is going away. I don't think this is getting any smaller over time. If anything, because that's where the titans of capitalism exist, right? I mean, the biggest companies in the world, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, I mean, that's their bread and butter. They want us to spend time there. I mean, okay, and here's where you could you can offer a critique to this desktop documentary by, like, engaging in this realm. You're actually like producing more value, cultural value, to this mode of existence that in many ways might not be to our betterment. But you're talking to a guy who grew up in front of screens because his parents were too busy trying to find gainful employment like, yeah, it's something I've experienced my whole life.
I mean, what I will say is, I think that I don't know that there are very many things that are truly one or the other, right? Like, I don't know that I believe in a binary, for example, like it's either good or ill, or it's, either.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that what the pandemic has shown people who work in critical disability studies, or rather people who are themselves disabled, is that, it's allowed them to have access to things that they wouldn't have before, right? The Louvre put, so many art museums put their works online, which then made it possible for people who both to access, right? Who wouldn't be able to access it because they didn't have the financial means to fly over to Paris to actually see these paintings in person, or because they have physical limited accessibility issues. And that's actually something I hope doesn't change, right? Like, I think there are lessons to be learned from the pandemic that I completely agree with you in terms of capitalism, and, like obviously Google wants to do certain algorithms to keep us online. But I also think this has opened up opportunities for people and allows us to maybe think about, I do have the luxury of being able to take my body outside and experience nature. But for other people, this is really a lifeline.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, in my former school, Merits Academy, we were able to graduate a student who had severe anxiety disorder because she could continue studying online. So you definitely have a point there. So yeah, you're right. It's and when you think about what social media has done, I think social media has actually given more visibility to people of color. I mean, I think it really galvanized and amplified the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. These phenomenon would not have been nearly as impactful without social media really making certain voices more heard and certain things more visible. I mean, you also have the trolls too, but at the same time, history has definitely been changed through the virtual field.
Well, I will say, I think, to come full circle, Kevin, it is pretty remarkable for the two of us. I feel I don't know if you feel that way, but I'm thinking about, this is a pretty radical act. Like, if you think about 20 years ago, for the two of us to be sharing screen space like this, because I also grew up pretty working class, where my parents were just like, need to make money so that we can survive, right?
Two Bay Area people who found each other. I mean, you're right. So.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being here, for being our second Cox family speaker. I hope to one day be able to shake your hand in person. Thank you to Sarah. Thank you to Kat and Danny. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Another round of applause for Kevin. We will have this recording available on our YouTube channel, and where you can debate whether we've made a movie or not. But let me just say goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.